So now we have our next guest online. Our guest is Nicolai Due-Gundersen. He's a political expert, and I think we'd like to talk to him. Welcome to Drive Time Show on Voice of Islam Radio, Mr. Nicolai Due-Gundersen. Peace be on you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much. So, coming to the topic today, we are discussing the U.S. with Iran and how the sanctions are they going to work or not. So, U.S. has ruled out an exemption from Iranian sanctions. Is this simply because of a nuclear weapon, or it's more about Iranian influence within the Middle East?
Well, it's certainly a bit of both. There's a lot to do with Iran's politics within the region. I mean, we're talking about a country that since 1979, there was this belief that Iran would try to export their revolution, whereas nowadays we're seeing more the U.S. fear of losing out on influence in the Middle East. Iran is cooperating with Qatar, with Turkey in the Middle East, and also now to an extent with Russia in Syria at a time when Trump wants to pull out. He's vacillated between pulling out entirely or pulling out gradually. So I do believe that the Trump administration is worried that as they try to wind down activity in the Middle East, Iran will ramp up their activity. And both Russia and Iran support Assad, including, of course, through providing oil to the Assad regime.
So currently the USA sanctions not only affecting Iran, but other oil consumer states as well, such as India, China, and Japan also. So how long will the US be able to hold these economic sanctions?
Well, this is the problem because Asia is growing and they need oil. They're growing economies, growing countries, and they have to balance their energy needs with good U.S. relations. The U.S. is still seen as an important player to an extent across the world. Asia has enjoyed sanction waivers regarding Iran, but that's now come to an end.
Yeah.
So this is a problem, and it's also what we see with the Japanese Prime Minister Abe visiting Iran, of course, as that may be something he will discuss. At the same time, OPEC has a vested interest in preventing Iran from coming to market because it means that, you have another rival supplier of oil. And also, if Asia cannot waive the sanctions or find a way around them, they're going to be forced to continue buying for higher prices from other Middle Eastern suppliers. And OPEC has no problem with that because most of OPEC's members are, of course, oil states in the Gulf region.
Yeah, exactly. And that actually brings us to our next question as well. You spoke about the Japanese Prime Minister, how he visited Iran. Can Japan play an active role in regards with the US and the Iran conflict that's going on?
There's really two issues there. For a start, I mean, Trump and the Japanese Prime Minister had a phone call right before his trip to Iran.
Yeah.
This is both positive and negative. It's positive in the sense that perhaps we have a potential mediator here, which is good. At the same time, he himself, the Japanese Prime Minister, is seen as someone who might be taking Trump's side. I'm not sure to what extent he would be regarded as neutral and therefore, open to mediating between Iran and the U.S. Iran has, during the trip, actually said to him that they are willing to consider mediation through the Japanese Prime Minister. But my hunch is that Iran would prefer a Gulf mediator to act, on their behalf. So, for example, Qatar is definitely a possible choice. Kuwait as well. Oman may be very likely as a candidate because they have good relations with the U.S. and with Iran.
Yeah, right. And one of the things that we talk about is some obstacles that are causing a hindrance for peace. So one major obstacle in the way of achieving this could be because of the attitude of arrogance between the two nations, between the big nations of the world as well. Do you think that that's the case with the United States and Iran also?
To an extent, I do. I think that the U.S. has a lot to answer for in this case. Let us say Trump and Bolton have a lot to answer for in this case.
Yeah.
Of course, the idea of Iran ramping up its rhetoric as well, and also getting to the point where it might go beyond the nuclear deal in terms of what it's permitted to produce when it comes to uranium. It hasn't reached that stage yet, but it's getting there. One of the reasons it's getting there is because of Trump's rhetoric. Someone like John Bolton, who's advising him, and they are butting heads now, when he says things like, Iran constitutes an imminent threat, and he doesn't necessarily have any proof, I mean, that's very, very aggressive. We're also talking about within the Middle East in general, there's a lot of saving face in these cultures. In other words, a public insult would not necessarily invite that country's leadership to say, listen, let's talk. They're going to basically trade one insult for another. And so I think that there's a lot here regarding Trump's attitude towards diplomacy or lack thereof. He's a very aggressive president. He launches attacks on Twitter. This is not really a presidential or diplomatic way of talking to Iran. So I think that this is certainly a problem, and we can say that within the Middle East, the U.S.'s attitude and the U.S.'s credibility has started to become a problem since probably 2003. So it's not just about Iran, but about how the U.S. sees the Middle East in general and how it treats the Middle East.
Exactly. So obviously, when there are these tensions, when there are these obstacles as well, we must have and we must find an agreement as well. What sort of agreement do you think that would be best suitable to accommodate the needs for both countries and keep them off the brink of war?
Well, for a start, I think that they need to have a private conversation. This is going to be the toughest part. The original nuclear deal is still a way forward because it provided a framework that initially both countries were willing to use. Before Trump, the U.S. was willing to use the nuclear deal. Now they're talking about how Iran is attacking Emirati vessels in the Strait of Hormuz in the Gulf without necessarily having proof. So we see that the rhetoric has become much more belligerent from Trump's side, and it's gotten so intense that really what we need a president who's willing to say to Iran publicly, listen, this rhetoric has gotten out of hand. Let's start from the beginning and let's talk. So that he needs to almost kind of apologize publicly and reach out to Iran privately and be willing to listen to their side of the story. At the same time, I think Iran maintains, and weapons inspectors maintain, that uranium enrichment is still below the acceptable limits according to the nuclear deal. So, in a sense, that also goes to show that Iran is not necessarily in the wrong here. It seems Trump is pushing his own agenda quite aggressively and ramping up rhetoric against Iran, which could, of course, lead to more tension in the Gulf.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, listening to each other, listening to what the problems are as well, but making sure that you're giving, you're trying to help the other country as well, and putting your own, interests aside as well, and trying to make sure that the whole region and the whole state is at that level that they can help each other. That's that's the most important thing as well.
Exactly right. This is, I think, what Trump needs to remember is this is diplomacy, not business. This is not an episode of The Apprentice. This is diplomacy, and there are going to be political repercussions if he continues to act aggressively towards Iran when they were previously willing to talk to him.
Yeah, definitely. Nicolai Due-Gundersen, thank you so much once again for joining us.
Thank you for
having me. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and have a lovely day.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.